But let's start off with the climate alarmists. And the climate change mob have got something right this year. They're having their Gabfest, their conference of the parties or COP meeting, somewhere hot. It helps with their narrative to have this COP27 in Egypt rather than in some miserably cold joint like Glasgow or Copenhagen as they have in the past. By the way, have you noticed how here in Australia there hasn't been too much excitement about the temperature records lately? You know, the coldest days or coldest months, wettest as well. As you know, when there's a maximum record broken, even by a weather station that's only been around a few years, or even when it's only a record because the earlier maximums have been revised downwards or homogenised, as the bomb calls it, so that we record temperatures now lower than earlier, but we call them a new record maximum. Still, the point I'm making is when that happens, when there's a maximum record, the media goes nuts. This is a sign of a looming catastrophe, they say. We'll all drown in boiling oceans, all the rest of it. But records for cold days, well, they don't seem to like them so much. They'll mutter something about climate change and extremes, and then they move on. We've had heavy falls of snow in the Alps and in the New South Wales tablelands. Record cold days in southern Queensland. Stacks of rain and flooding, of course. We'll catch up on the latest on that in a moment. And the coldest Melbourne Cup day in more than a century. And this precious little media alarmism, precious little attention. Bizarre, isn't it? But enough of that. As I said, the COP27 meeting, so named, I guess, because they make crazy decisions and set ridiculous climate targets and we cop the consequences. Anyway, the COP meeting this year is at the warm and sunny Egyptian seaside resort town of Sharm el-Sheikh. Forecast today to have a sunny day and 28 degrees.
How many more wake-up calls does the world actually need? Entire regions becoming unlivable, and the strain on the global movement of goods and the pressure of people to relocate because of the climate crisis becoming almost unimaginable.
Looks exciting, doesn't it? Don't you wish you were there, saving the planet? Now, as per usual, the paradoxes are obvious and immediate. This time it was the Great Pyramids near Cairo being lit up for COP27. In this energy-starved world, too much energy is never enough for self-promotion. No doubt that stuff was all renewable and emissions-free and all the rest of it. This meeting is attracting the usual crowds of bureaucrats, diplomats, do-gooders, grifters and world leaders. Even the US President and the UK Prime Minister will be there. Alarmism and fear-mongering abound. This stuff is just untrue, of course. The science, the facts tell us cold kills many more people than heat every year. And in Europe this winter, as you know, thousands extra will die for want of cheap energy to heat their homes. But so much of our media choose to ignore such facts, ignore the reality, and go with the zeitgeist, which of course is the climate catastrophe propaganda.
In the 12 months since COP26, the Earth has seen wildfires devastate Europe and North America and heatwaves strike India and China. Today, Australia is coping with floods as Africa faces a devastating drought.
Across the Horn of Africa, we have over 20 million people, and mostly it's the women and the children that are on the front line.
But amid the bleak outlook, there remain signs of hope. Renewable energy uptake is surging, and Brazil has just elected a president who's vowed to protect the Amazon.
There are multiple reasons to be hopeful. For the new Australian government now has a legally binding target of at least 43% emission reductions by 2030.
Now, despite such heroic positioning, our Prime Minister is staying home. Anthony Albanese, who keeps telling us that his plans to dramatically transform our busted electricity grid and drive through the current electricity supply and price crisis by pushing even higher investments in renewable energy. Well, he says all this chaos is worth it because it will save the planet. He neglects to mention his plans, if they work, will adjust our share of global emissions from just over 1% of global emissions to just under 1%. And he also never mentions that global emissions will continue to rise anyway, so there'll be no discernible change in anything. Well, there's higher power bills, but there won't be any change in the climate, of course. But Albanese justifies all these policies in the pretense that he's saving the planet. Yet when they have the main global meeting to save the planet, he doesn't turn up. He sends Chris Bowen instead. Now, there are two ways to look at this. Either Albo has finally come to his senses and realised Australia can't save the planet, or more likely, the Prime Minister has just decided he's travelled too much already, power prices are soaring at home and there's a cost of living crunch, and he's better off letting Bowen handle this meeting. In other words, cynical political considerations matter more than supposedly saving the planet. We all have to be prepared for this climate madness to get worse, I'm sorry to say. Reports today reveal a Green Left think tank has recommended that the Reserve Bank of Australia include climate change risks in its national economic analysis and policy decisions. Australian well-being depends on an orderly transition to a steady net zero economy and a sustainable natural environment, says Toby Phillips of the Centre for Policy Development. Updating the RBA toolkit so it can protect Australian well-being with a stable financial system and a smooth transition is the most sensible reform we can make. What dross? The Reserve Bank's job is to keep inflation and unemployment low, and it has manifestly mangled that job over the past 18 months, effectively advising people in this country to borrow big because inflation and rates were going nowhere. And now it's hammering us with rate increases to get inflation under control. I guess the RBA has an affinity with the climate change lobby because, like them, it seems to get its forecasts all wrong. Perhaps it should stick to its knitting. If it did that, it might warn about the economic harm being inflicted on this country in the name of climate change policies that, as a matter of fact, as a matter of science and rational analysis, cannot deliver any discernible climate benefit. Anyway, if you get your power bill this week and it stings a bit, don't worry. Think about all those freeloaders in Sharm el-Sheikh. Think about their lofty goals to rewrite the global order and save the planet. Think about how they are lauded and encouraged by the Greens, the Teals, Labor and the moderate Liberals. And just remember that you're paying more for your power, and it's all part of their plan. It makes them feel like they are achieving something, even though there are no signs of any of this working yet or ever. Yep, it was a wise decision by Albanese to stay away because he knows the optics are bad. I just wish he'd go the next logical step and come to understand that the policies are as bad as the optics.